Boker Tov, Chaverim, and welcome to once again to our Heartfelt Haftarah. Our Torah portion this week is going to be Vayeshev, which is the beginning of the saga of our ancestor Joseph. This is the beginning of the story where Joseph, as a rather callow young man, ends up provoking his brothers to the point that they sell him into slavery, and he ends up finding himself in the land of Egypt, where his natural talent and his trustworthy nature lead him to rise and fall and rise again. And he starts to establish that he is moving beyond his callow youth towards his status as Yosef HaTzadik, Joseph, the righteous one. And it is that, I believe, that moniker, Joseph the righteous one, that leads to the connection between our Torah portion this week and our Haftarah portion. Our Haftarah portion comes from the book of Amos, and there is a reference to a righteous person being sold into slavery. It's not referring to Joseph, but clearly it was a trigger term for the rabbis, and they connected it to Joseph, and therefore they chose this particular Haftarah portion to go. So a little tent peg business. My tent peg's looking a little not so sharp anymore. There we go. There it is. So anyway, we're going to be talking about the prophet Amos or Amos. If I struggled a little bit to find much meaningful in Obadiah, which is one of the, not surprisingly, most neglected of the Hebrew prophets, there is no lack of material in the writing of Amos. So who was Amos? I alluded earlier to the idea that really prophecy, as we think of it, classical prophecy, gets its start in the northern kingdom, not in the southern kingdom. And we talk about the narrative prophets, Elijah and Elisha, who are part of they have important stories, important miracle stories, but also they present as revolutionaries fighting against an unjust king. And then we met Hosea, the first of the literary prophets, or the latter prophets, who is writing in his own voice. And he too is a prophet of the northern kingdom. And when we come to Amos now, who is, as far as we can tell, pretty much a contemporary of Hosea, that interestingly enough, though he preaches in the north, he's actually a southerner. But he comes north and he presents his message at the temple in Bethel, which we've been introduced to by the story of our ancestor Jacob, how he finds this obscure location, has a dream there, declares it to be a place where God dwells, and it becomes known as Beit El, the house of God, or the dwelling place of God. And then later centuries, it becomes the southern temple for the northern kingdom, not to be confused with the northern temple for the northern kingdom, which is in Tel Dan. So anyway, so Amos shows up at the temple in Bethel, and he starts to immediately berate the leadership of the northern kingdom for their ethical failures. And Amos becomes the archetypal prophet who makes righteousness and justice and societal fairness a central theme of his preaching, and helps to become, in many ways, the archetype of the prophet who is not in the service of the high and mighty, who is determined to stand up for the poor and the wretched and the afflicted. And he also is full of beautiful rhetoric that we use to this day. His most famous line is probably "Let righteousness flow down like water, and justice like a mighty stream," a line that has been used over and over and over again in Jewish tradition, though it doesn't appear in this particular section. But in any case, it is Elijah and Elisha and Hosea and Amos who sort of set the golden standard for the prophetic dissenter, the dissident, the one who speaks for those who have no voice. And so that's the case here. So the connection is between Joseph the Tzaddik and the anonymous Tzaddik that Amos refers to, and the theme of righteousness is central to that. So I put away my tent peg, and let's go ahead and take a look at why we remember Amos so vividly. All right. So this is chapter 2, and it's going to go to chapter 3, verse 8. And it starts out with a very, very clever rhetorical presentation. And I'll read some of it to you, and then I'll go on and explain how his rhetorical strategy works for his audience. Begins, "Thus says the Eternal One, for Israel's 3 transgressions, and for 4, I will not revoke judgment, because they sell the innocent for silver, and the needy for a pair of sandals, who trample the heads of the poor into the earth's dust, and make crooked the road of the meek. Father and son go to the same girl, and thus they profane my holy name. Near every altar they lie on clothing that has been taken in pledge of those who have been fined. They drink wine in the house of their God. Yet as I, who destroyed the Amorites before them, who were tall as cedars and sturdy as oaks, I destroyed their fruit on top and cut their roots beneath. And so it was, I brought you up from the land of Egypt and led you in the wilderness for 40 years to take possession of the land of the Amorites. I raised up prophets among your people and Nazarites among your young. Is this not so, people of Israel, says the Eternal? But you have made the Nazarites drunk with wine and prohibited the prophets from prophesying. And now I will make you totter as a wagon totters under a full load of newly cut grain. Flight shall fail the swift, the strong shall have no strength, and warriors will not escape with their lives." All right, so what's going on here? Well, the sages do a little bit of a disservice to the prophet and his speaking and writing style in this particular case, because it begins with this phrase for 3 matters, no 4, which is sort of an Israelite way of saying because of reasons beyond count. But we've heard this phrase before earlier in chapter 2. What Amos does for his audience is he starts condemning the nations around the people Israel. He starts out by saying, for 3 matters, not 4, will I condemn Edom and the Amorites and the Egyptians and the Tyrians. And he goes down a list of all of Israel's enemies and offers a condemnation for each of them. And the natural response of his listening audience is going to be, yeah, hell yeah, go get him, Amos. Let him have it. And he works his way down a list of the northern kingdom's enemies and rivals, including the kingdom of Judah. And everybody is now really caught up in just how much God is going to bring retribution to all of Israel's enemies. And then he does what we just heard now. He says, for 3, no, 4 transgressions will I punish Israel. So suddenly he shifts gear on his audience and says, you've been cheering all of this up to now, but God has an additional message specifically for you. And it is you who sell the poor for the price of a sandal, who condemn the righteous, etc. I think it's translated as innocent in that particular translation, but there's the word tzaddik there. So he traps them rhetorically by appealing to their prejudices, and then forces them to confront the fact that they themselves are transgressors and people who do terrible, terrible things to their own people. And that's the beginning of Amos's message of internal criticism, and creates the tradition within Judaism of self-criticism. This is one of the things that other people don't get. A lot of people, a lot of anti-Semites, and there seem to be a lot of them these days, like to point to the fact that the Jews talk about their own sins quite a bit, and therefore we must be a uniquely sinful people, or we talk about the misdeeds of our own people, and therefore we must be uniquely evil because we ourselves admit that. But of course, they miss the point. The point is, if anything, that the Jewish people are uniquely self-critical people, that because we want to be the best possible people we can be, we always have dissonant voices, we always have internal criticism, we're always striving to say, is this really the best we can do? And so what seems like an innate flaw or weakness within the Jewish people is, we believe, our strength. They were not simply going to be mindless patriots. They were not going to be chauvinists who pretend like we do no wrong, but rather we begin with that very important analysis. How am I falling short of God's intention? And then, and only then, can we speak to other people. And so this is one of the great beauties of Jewish tradition, this ability to hold ourselves accountable, to measure ourselves not against our neighbors necessarily, or often quite awful people, but to measure ourselves against God's expectations. It's hard. It's not easy to listen to. Anybody who's listened to the High Holy Day liturgy, where we engage in extravagant self-criticism, often people feel like, oh my God, it's so too much. We're blaming ourselves for too much. But this comes directly from Amos and the prophetic tradition that demands self-accountability, even at the same time as we are looking to hold other people accountable. We want to be people who do witness and honor God. And Amos, in this particular passage and in many others, teach us to do that. And it's really a perfect counterpoint to the story of Joseph, who ends up abused by his own kin, and then finds himself dealing with the shortcomings of the Egyptian people. And he, in humility, is able to speak to their failings because he can speak to his own. And that's our Heartfelt Haftarah for this week, and I look forward to talking with you next week.